For 200 years, the galaxy had repeated the same sentence like a prayer. Human weapons must never return to space. It was taught in council schools. It was carved into memorial walls. It was written into trade law, military law, border law, and emergency law. Every species knew it. Every captain feared it. Every human child grew up hearing the same story from a distance, as if it belonged to some darker version of history. There had once been human warships. Then there had been a war so terrible that the galaxy chose to erase them, not just limit them, not just watch them, erase them. The old shipyards were cut apart. Human battle AIs were locked away. Weapon foundries were turned into civilian factories. Even research on heavy human combat systems became forbidden across council space. In return, humanity was allowed to stay in the interstellar community, trade freely, and keep its colonies. It was called peace. But peace built on fear is never fully quiet. That was why Archivist Sun Tao felt cold the moment the dead channel came alive. He was not a soldier. He was not a hero. He was not even human. Sun Tao was a Vereen historian assigned to the Grand Council Archive, ring above the world of Helion. His work was simple. He cataloged treaties, translated old reports, and sometimes argued with stubborn machine librarians about file formats older than planet-side cities. Most days were dull. That day began dull, too. Then the black monitor on Desk 9 flickered. At first, he thought it was a maintenance glitch. Desk 9 was connected to sealed historical networks. No live traffic should ever pass through it. It was a dead system for dead records. But the screen kept flickering. A thin line of static appeared. Then 3 sharp tones sounded through the chamber. Not loud, not dramatic. Just 3 dry pulses. Everyone in the room looked up. Sun Tao turned slowly toward the sound. Desk 9 had no speaker power unless a system override activated it. No one touched the console. No one even breathed for a second. Then the screen cleared, and a line of ancient military code appeared in old trade script. Priority Omega, strategic human distress. The chamber felt instantly smaller. One of the junior clerks laughed nervously. That cannot be real. No one answered him, because everyone there knew what those words meant. Or rather, they knew what they were supposed to mean. Nothing. That command class had been deleted from every legal network after the disarmament accords. Human military distress codes above civil defense level had not existed for 2 centuries. Even archive examples required triple authorization to view. And yet there it was. Alive. Calling. Sun Tao moved first. He crossed the room with shaking hands and locked down the archive doors. The other clerks backed away from the dead console as if it might explode. He opened a verification shell. The system returned one answer. Source chain authentic. Relay path damaged. Origin unstable. Then a second line appeared. Origin estimate. The null belt. Now someone actually cursed out loud. The null belt was not just empty space. It was one of those regions the galaxy pretended not to think about. A torn strip of dark vacuum between old jump corridors, full of broken signals, gravity scars, and ships that vanished from maps. Long ago, in the final months before the weapons ban, several human combat groups had entered that region. None had officially returned. Every public record said they were lost during the last containment operations of the war. Containment operations. That was a phrase old governments used when the truth was too dangerous to say plainly. Sun Tao forced himself to breathe. Seal the room, he said. No one sends this outside standard archive priority. Not yet. But if it's real, Sun Tao said, then panic helps no one. He leaned closer to the screen. More text crawled upward, half broken, half translated from an older machine language. Repeating distress call. Outer lock failure imminent. Request immediate response. Council law exception code. Ashfall. Sun Tao stared. There was no such exception code in the public treaty index. And then came the final line. Send human warships. Silence filled the chamber so completely that the low hum of the station sounded like thunder. One of the clerks whispered, "That has to be a trick." "Yes," another said too quickly. "A pirate go signal, or a corrupted echo." But Sun Tao already knew it was neither. He had spent 12 years inside buried history. He knew the shape of lies. He knew forged politics. He knew when governments buried things so deeply that even scholars were not meant to touch them. This did not feel forged. It felt hidden. And worst of all, it felt urgent. Within 18 minutes, the archive chamber was under military seal. Within 24, Sun Tao stood inside the upper crisis hall of the Grand Council ring, surrounded by officials who looked as if the floor had dropped beneath them. The humans arrived last. That detail stayed with him, not because they were late, but because they were quiet. Ambassador Mara Vance entered with 2 advisors and 1 security officer. No medals, no uniforms, no visible rank symbols except council credentials. They looked like diplomats, researchers, even merchants. But Sun Tao noticed something that the others noticed too. When the ancient distress code appeared on the main chamber display, none of the humans looked confused. They looked afraid. Council Speaker Iller, an old Thalen statesman with silver skin and dark ceremonial robes, began the session without greeting. 3 independent systems confirm the signal is active, he said. 5 confirm the path is not civilian. The origin remains uncertain, but continues to align with the null belt. We now require human clarification. Every eye in the hall turned to Mara Vance. She did not rise at once. She kept her gaze on the signal text, especially the last line, "Send human warships." When she finally stood, her expression was calm. Too calm. "There are no human warships," she said. The chamber erupted instantly. "That is not the question. You recognize the code. You knew of this. Explain the exception code." Speaker Iller struck the staff of order against the floor. Silence. The noise faded slowly. Mara folded her hands behind her back. "I recognize parts of Code Family. It is older than any modern military structure. Most of it predates even the final treaty drafts." Sun Tao watched her carefully. "Then what is Ashfall?" he asked. Her eyes shifted to him. For half a second, something changed in her face. Not surprise. Recognition. As if she had hoped no one in the room would know enough history to ask the correct question. "That term," she said slowly, "does not appear in legal public records." "So it is real," said Speaker Iller. Mara did not answer. That was answer enough. A Car military delegate leaned forward, claws tapping the table. "You are hiding strategic knowledge from the council during an emergency." "No," Mara said. "My government is deciding how much of a buried nightmare it can explain without breaking the very laws this chamber wrote." That silenced even the angriest voices. Sun Tao felt a new chill. Buried nightmare. Those were not careless words. Speaker Iller lowered his tone. "Ambassador, if the signal is false, say so. If it is real, we are already beyond secrecy." Mara looked up at the huge projection of the old code. Her face had gone pale under the chamber lights. "It may be real," she said. A low wave of uneasy sound moved through the hall. One of her advisors closed his eyes. The Car delegate bared his teeth. "Then, human military assets survived the ban." "No," Mara snapped. "Listen carefully. Surviving is not the same as operating." The room went still again. "What does that mean?" Sun Tao asked. Mara answered him, not the chamber. "It means there were things at the end of the war that could not be destroyed safely. Things that could not be moved. Things too dangerous to release and too dangerous to admit." No one spoke. The old stories of the final war were full of missing pages. Whole fleets vanished from records. Entire campaigns ended with single-line summaries. Sectors were closed, erased, renamed, and hidden. Now those missing pages felt suddenly close. Speaker Iller's voice became almost quiet. What exactly was in the null belt? Mara said nothing. Then the wall display changed by itself. The signal had updated. Not text this time. Video. Broken, grainy, unstable video from a source so old that half the image looked eaten by noise. A corridor appeared on screen. Narrow. Metal walls. Red emergency lights. Sparks falling from the ceiling. Then a body drifted through frame. Human, in an old pressure suit. Dead. Several people in the hall recoiled. The video shook. Somewhere beyond the camera, alarms howled in a harsh mechanical rhythm. Then a voice came through. Weak, rough, and full of static. Bastion actual to any lawful receiver. Outer seal failure confirmed. Mimic pressure in lower vaults. Repeat. Mimic pressure in lower vaults. The image jerked sideways. Something moved at the far end of the corridor. At first Untal thought it was another person. Then it bent wrong. Too many joints. Too smooth. Too quick. The video cut to black. The chamber lights seemed dimmer after that. Mimic? Whispered one of the council aides. Speaker Iller turned to Mara, so sharply that his robe swayed. What is in the vaults? Before she could answer, the station alarms began to sound. Not local alarms. Long-range alert tones. A tactical officer rushed into the hall, breathing hard. Unknown contact emerging from outer dark near Relay Edge 17. Size. The officer looked sick. Capital mass. The main display switched again. A shape appeared against the star field. Black at first. Then silver edges caught distant light. It was a ship. No. Suntao realized 1 second later. It was a warship. Long, heavy. Scarred. Built in a human design language no one had seen in generations. No commercial beacon. No registry ping. No council identity string. Only a faded emblem near the bow. A broken earth surrounded by a ring of spears. The old crest of Strategic Human Command. Whispers spread through the chamber like fire through dry grass. That is impossible. It survived. They lied. But the ship's condition told another story. Armor plates were torn open. One engine flank was dark. Whole sections looked burned. It was not entering like a conqueror. It was fleeing. Then more signals lit around it. Not one ship behind it. Many small objects. Too many. Moving fast. Changing shape on the edge of the sensors as if the instruments could not decide what they were seeing. The tactical officer spoke again, voice almost breaking. The human vessel is transmitting the same distress code. The speakers crackled. A tired human voice filled the chamber. This is Bastion Actual. Outer lock broken. Repeat, outer lock broken. If Council still stands, invoke Ashfall. Send human warships. Do not let them reach populated lanes. Then the voice stopped. For one heartbeat, no one moved. Then the sensors marked one of the pursuing contacts, clearly for the first time. It looked almost like a ship. Almost. And then its hull opened like a living jaw. Suntao felt every old history file in his mind suddenly line up into one terrible shape. The war had not ended because the galaxy won. It had ended because humanity had sealed something away. And now that seal was broken. At the center of the hall, with alarms crying and ghost contacts racing towards civilized space, Speaker Iller slowly turned to the human delegation. There are no human warships, he said. That is what your people told the galaxy. Mara Vance looked at the torn, ancient vessel on the screen. Then she gave the answer that made the whole chamber colder than space. There were no human warships, she said, but there may still be human weapon systems. And somewhere beyond the relay edge, the dead ship of a dead command began turning toward the council world as if it had one final message left to deliver. The council chamber did not feel like a place of diplomacy anymore. It felt like the center of a storm. Across the huge circular hall, hundreds of delegates from different species stared at the main display. The image of the damaged human warship filled the screen. Sparks flickered across its broken armor, and one entire engine section looked dark and silent. Behind it, the sensor grid showed dozens of moving contacts. They were not normal ships. They did not move in straight lines. They twisted, changed direction suddenly, and sometimes even disappeared from the sensor map for a few seconds before returning again. That alone was enough to frighten experienced captains. But what scared the council even more was the fact that those things were moving towards civilized space. Speaker Iller stood motionless at the center platform. Confirm identification, he said to the tactical officers. Running analysis now, the officer replied. Several holographic windows appeared in the air. Old recognition. Software struggled to match the shapes on the sensors. The result came back with only one message. Unknown structure. Delegate Morven from the Card Dominion slammed his clawed hand on the table. "This is unacceptable," he growled. "Humans bring forbidden warships into council space, and now unidentified vessels follow them." Ambassador Mara Vance did not react. She continued watching the screen. Sun Tao noticed something strange about her. She was not watching the damaged warship. She was watching the objects behind it, as if those things were the real problem. Speaker Iller turned toward her again. "Ambassador Vance, we require answers immediately." Mara finally looked at the council. Her voice remained calm, but the calm felt heavy. "That ship is not invading," she said. "Then what is it doing here?" Morven demanded. "It is running." The room fell silent. Running. A human warship running away from something. That was a sentence no one expected to hear. Human warships had once been famous for the opposite behavior. They advanced. They did not retreat. The tactical officer spoke again. "Update from long-range sensors. The human vessel is slowing down, possibly damaged repulsion." "How far the unknown contact behind it?" Speaker Iller asked. 2 minutes at current velocity." 2 minutes. A wave of unease passed through the chamber. "Open a channel," the speaker ordered. The communication console blinked as the system searched for a signal lock. Static filled the speakers. Then a rough human voice returned. "This is Bastion Actual. Repeat, Bastion Actual." The voice sounded tired, strained, as if the person speaking had not slept in days. "Bastion Actual," Speaker Iller said carefully. "This is the Galactic Council. Identify your command authority." For a moment there was only static. Then the voice answered. "Strategic Command, Containment Fleet, last surviving asset." Several delegates gasped. The word Strategic Command had not been spoken publicly in centuries. Speaker Iller kept his composure. "Your fleet no longer exists," he said. "Affirmative," the voice replied. "Fleet destroyed, station destroyed, outer locks breached." A heavy pause followed. Then the human voice continued. "We held them as long as possible." Sun Tao felt his throat tighten. "Held what?" the speaker asked. The answer came slowly. "The prisoners." Across the chamber, dozens of delegates exchanged nervous looks. Morven leaned forward again. "What prisoners?" The voice on the speaker crackled. "Unknown origin, discovered during the final war, adaptive organisms capable of imitation, infiltration, assimilation." The room suddenly felt colder. Sun Tao remembered the strange word from the earlier message. Mimic pressure. Speaker Iller spoke quietly now. "Explain." The damaged warship's camera activated. The large display changed again. This time the council saw the inside of the ship. The image shook violently. Red emergency lights flashed. Metal walls were covered with scratches and burn marks. Then the camera turned. A human officer appeared on screen. His uniform was old, far older than any modern military design. Blood covered one side of his helmet, but his eyes were still focused. "My name is Commander Elias Ward," he said. Ambassador Mara Vance stiffened. Sun Tao noticed it immediately. The commander continued speaking. "During the final months of the war, long-range scouts discovered something inside the null belt. At first we believed it was alien technology. Then we realized it was something else." The video feed flickered. Behind the commander, sparks fell from a damaged panel. "We call them Echoforms," he said. "Why?" Speaker Iller asked. "Because they copy." A quiet wave of dread moved through the chamber. Commander Ward continued. "They learn fast. They observe behavior, speech, structure. They can copy ships, machines, even living bodies." Several delegates recoiled. Morven's voice came out low and angry. "You expect us to believe shape-changing monsters exist in space?" Ward's tired eyes looked straight into the camera. "You are already seeing them." The main display switched back to the sensor map. The unknown objects behind the human ship were changing shape again. Now some of them looked almost like normal spacecraft, but their movements were still wrong. Too smooth, too alive. "They copy what they see," Ward explained. "When our fleet first fought them, they imitated our ships. Later they learned to imitate our crew." A deep silence filled the council hall. Containment became the only solution, Ward said. Containment where? Speaker Iller asked. In the null belt, Ward replied. The video showed a brief image of something enormous hidden inside the dark clouds of that region. A massive structure, ancient, built from hundreds of connected stations. A prison. Every species contributed to building it, Ward continued. But humans guarded it. Ambassador Mara Vance closed her eyes for a moment. Now Suntal understood. The galaxy had banned human warships, not only because of fear, but because those warships had been guarding something too dangerous to explain. Commander Ward's voice grew weaker. 2 days ago, the outer locks failed. The chamber lights dimmed slightly as the sensor grid updated again. The unknown contacts were getting closer. Now their shapes were clearer. They were not ships at all. They were clusters of shifting material that changed structure every few seconds. Some looked like broken hull fragments. Others looked like organic masses. And some looked disturbingly similar to human vessels. Morven's voice sounded less confident now. If these creatures can copy ships, they could infiltrate entire fleets. Ward nodded slowly. That is why the prison existed. And now it is broken, Speaker Iller said. Yes. The commander glanced behind him, as if hearing something inside the corridor. Metal scraped against metal somewhere in the background. We tried to destroy the station, he said, but they adapted faster than expected. The video flickered again. One of the council aides whispered in fear. What happens if they reach populated space? Ward answered without hesitation. They learn. That single sentence was enough. The Echoforms did not need weapons. If they could copy ships and people, they could spread quietly through the galaxy, world by world, fleet by fleet. Civilization would collapse without even understanding the enemy. Suntal suddenly understood the meaning of the distress code. Ashfall, emergency exception, a rule older than the weapons ban, a rule meant for a disaster no one wanted to remember. Speaker Iller turned slowly toward the human delegation. Ambassador Vance, if these things reach the core worlds, they will not stop, Mara said. Then we must destroy them. Yes. Morven stood up. Then deploy your fleets. Mara looked directly at him. There are no fleets. Morven slammed his fist on the table again. Then why did your commander request warships? For the first time since the meeting began, Mara's calm expression cracked slightly. Because there are things in storage that are worse than fleets. The chamber fell silent again. Suntal felt the weight of history pressing down on the room. Old weapons, buried systems, technology humanity had locked away centuries ago. Speaker Iller spoke slowly. Are those systems still operational? Mara hesitated. Yes. That single word sent a wave of tension across the council. Morven narrowed his eyes. You expect the galaxy to trust human superweapons after banning them for 2 centuries? Mara answered without raising her voice. You banned them because they were dangerous. Yes. And today, she said quietly, danger is exactly what we need. The tactical officer interrupted suddenly. Update. Everyone turned to the display. One of the Echoform contacts had surged forward. It closed the distance to the damaged human warship in seconds. The Bastion actual fired. A bright beam of energy cut across space. The contact exploded. But the fragments did something impossible. They reformed, growing back together, changing shape, learning. Commander Ward's voice returned through the speakers. They adapt after every attack. We cannot hold them much longer. Behind him, the sound of metal tearing echoed through the corridor. Something was inside the ship. Council, he said urgently, if those things reach your worlds, the galaxy ends. His breathing grew heavy. Invoke Ashfall, send the warships. The transmission suddenly cut. The damaged human ship spun slightly in space. Another Echoform mass rushed toward it. Inside the council chamber, fear finally became real. Speaker Iller turned slowly toward Mara Vance. If we break the ban, he said, there is no going back. Mara looked at the approaching swarm on the display. Then she gave the answer that changed everything. The ban was written to stop human weapons, she said, but it was also written to protect the galaxy. She took a slow breath. And today, protecting the galaxy means waking them up again. At that exact moment, the sensors detected something new, far beyond the Council station, deep in silent space. Old human military beacons, silent for 2 centuries, were beginning to activate, one by one, like sleeping giants opening their eyes. And somewhere in the darkness of the Echoform swarm, something large began moving, much larger than the rest, as if the creatures themselves had a leader, and it was coming straight for the Council world. The Council chamber no longer felt like a place of debate. It felt like the last calm moment before disaster. On the massive display above the hall, the damaged human warship Bastion actually drifted through space, its engines struggling to stay alive. Small explosions flickered across its hull like dying stars. Behind it, the strange Echoform swarm moved closer. The creatures did not fly like ships. They moved like something alive. Sometimes they stretched into long shapes like blades. Sometimes they spread into clouds of shining fragments. Other times they pulled themselves together into forms that looked disturbingly similar to normal spacecraft. They were learning. Every second. Inside the chamber, hundreds of council delegates watched in silence. No one argued anymore. Fear had replaced politics. Speaker Iller turned toward the human delegation again. "You said the band protected the galaxy," he said quietly. "Explain." Ambassador Mara Vance stepped forward. Her voice was calm, but everyone could see the tension in her eyes. "The band was never only about war," she said. The council listened carefully. Sun Tao, the Vereen archivist, leaned closer to the console beside him. Every word mattered now. Mara continued. 2 centuries ago, during the final phase of the war, humanity discovered the echoforms inside the null belt. Several delegates nodded slowly. They had already heard the basics from Commander Ward, but Mara raised her hand. "You do not understand how dangerous they are." The main display changed again. New images appeared. Old recordings. Ancient battle footage from the final war. The video showed a human patrol fleet approaching a strange asteroid cluster. Then the asteroids moved. They unfolded like metal flowers. Some became ships. Others became giant claw-like structures. Within seconds, the human fleet was surrounded. Energy beams cut through space. Explosions filled the screen. But the Echoforms did not behave like normal enemies. Every time one of them was destroyed, the fragments began moving again, reforming, adapting, learning. One Echoform copied the shape of a human destroyer almost perfectly. Another copied a human fighter. Then the recording ended suddenly. The council chamber remained silent. "They adapt faster than any known species," Mara said. "Every battle made them stronger." Morven of the Car Dominion spoke slowly. "Then how were they stopped?" Mara turned toward him. They were not stopped. The words hit the chamber like ice. They were contained. The display changed again. A massive structure appeared. It was enormous. Hundreds of station-sized rings connected together in deep space, forming a gigantic barrier around a dark region of the null belt. The prison. Sun Tao felt his heart beat faster. "This is the Bastion grid," Mara said. "A containment system built by the entire galaxy." Speaker Iller frowned. "If all species built it, why did humans guard it alone?" Mara answered without hesitation. "Because human warships were the only vessels powerful enough to hold the line." That explanation made the room uneasy again. 2 centuries earlier, human military technology had been the most advanced in the galaxy. Too advanced. That was the reason the Council demanded the weapons ban after the war. But now it seemed those weapons had also been the only defense against the Echoforms. Morven crossed his arms. "So the ban removed the very force protecting the prison." Mara nodded slowly. "Yes." A wave of nervous whispers spread through the chamber. Speaker Iller looked troubled. "You expect us to believe the Council banned the only defense system against this threat?" "The Council believed the Bastion grid will hold forever," Mara replied. "And now it has failed." "Yes." The tactical officer suddenly spoke. "New update." Everyone looked back at the display. The Echoform swarm was growing larger. More shapes were appearing behind the first wave. Dozens, maybe hundreds. The Bastion actual fired another beam. The blast destroyed two of the approaching shapes. But seconds later, those shapes began reforming again. Commander Ward's damaged ship turned slowly as if preparing for one final attack. The communication channel suddenly reopened. Ward's voice returned. Weak, breathing heavy. Council, do you copy? Speaker Iller answered immediately. We copy. Ward's helmet camera showed a corridor behind him. It was worse now. The metal walls were bent and torn open. Something had forced its way through. Outer decks lost, Ward said. Containment teams gone. Behind him, a shadow moved. Something crawled along the ceiling. For a moment it looked human. Then its body stretched longer than any human form should allow. Ward fired his weapon. A bright flash filled the corridor. The creature exploded into fragments. But those fragments started moving again. Ward slammed the door shut. The transmission shook. They're inside the ship now, he said. The council hall became completely silent. Ward looked directly into the camera. You must activate Ashfall. Morven spoke sharply. What exactly is Ashfall? Ward hesitated. Then he answered. The final defense system. The chamber lights dimmed again as the display changed. Sun Tao saw something new on the screen. Deep space coordinates. Many of them. Spread across different star systems. Speaker Iller pointed at the map. What are those? Mara Vance took a slow breath. They are the locations of the old human defense vaults. Several delegates leaned forward. Vaults? One of them asked. Yes. Containing what? Mara looked at the Echoforms swarm approaching the Bastion actual. Then she said the words the council had feared. Automated warships. The entire chamber erupted. You said there were none. They were dismantled. The treaty forbade them. Mara raised her voice for the first time. They are not fleets. The room fell quiet again. They are sealed weapons, she continued. Machines built for one purpose. And that purpose? Speaker Iller asked. Destroying threats like the Echoforms. The tactical officer interrupted again. Alert! The swarm had reached the Bastion actual. Several Echoforms attached themselves to the ship's hull. Metal began bending. The creatures were tearing it open. Commander Ward's voice returned again. They're breaking through. His camera shook violently. Gunfire echoed behind him. More strange shapes moved in the corridor. Ward turned back toward the camera. If Ashfall fails... He stopped speaking. For a moment, he looked directly at Ambassador Mara Vance. Recognition flashed in his eyes. Mara... Her face went pale. Mara, is that you? Yes, she whispered. Ward gave a tired smile. I hoped someone from Earth would hear the call. He turned his weapon again as another creature appeared behind him. Mara, you know the protocol. She nodded slowly. Yes. Ward's voice became quiet. Then do it. The connection ended. The Bastion actual's engines flared once. The ship turned directly toward the swarm. Then its reactor exploded. A massive white flash filled the screen. For a moment, the Echoforms disappeared in the light. The council chamber was silent. Sun Tao realized he was holding his breath. Then the sensor grid updated. The Echoforms were still there. Fragments of the creatures drifted in space. But those fragments began moving again, reforming, growing, learning. Morven whispered in disbelief. They survived that? The tactical officer nodded slowly. Yes. Now the situation was clear. The Echoforms were coming. Nothing in the current fleets could stop them. Speaker Iller turned slowly toward Mara. If we activate these vaults... The ban ends, she said. And if we do nothing... Mara looked at the moving swarm on the display. Then the galaxy ends. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Speaker Iller raised the staff of council authority. All delegates vote now. Lights appeared across the chamber. One by one they turned green. The vote passed. Speaker Iller looked at Mara Vance. The council authorizes Ashfall. Mara walked to the central console. Her hand hovered above the activation panel. For 2 centuries, humanity had kept its promise. No warships, no military fleets, no strategic weapons. But those promises were made for peace. and peace was ending. Mara pressed a command key. Far away in deep space, ancient human defense vaults began to open. Massive armored doors moved for the first time in 200 years. Inside the darkness, cold machines began waking. Silent reactors powered up. Navigation systems activated. And in the deepest vault of them all, something much larger than a normal warship opened its eyes. Back in the council chamber, the sensors detected it instantly. The tactical officer stared at the screen in shock. That cannot be a ship. Speaker Iller looked at the growing signal. Then what is it? The officer swallowed. It's a fortress, and it was already moving toward the Echoform swarm. The council chamber had never seen anything like it. On the massive star map above the hall, new signals were appearing one after another. They were not civilian ships. They were not council fleets. They were something older, something forgotten. Ancient human military beacons, silent for 200 years, were activating across different star systems, one after another, like lights turning on in a dark room. Sun Tao watched the display with wide eyes. Each beacon marked the location of a hidden human defense vault, and each vault was opening. The tactical officer spoke carefully. Vault activation confirmed in 12 systems. Another officer added, additional signals detected 15, 18. More dots appeared on the map. Each dot represented a dormant war machine waking up after centuries of silence. In the center of the chamber, Ambassador Mara Vance stood beside the activation console. Her hand remained still, but everyone could see the weight of what had just happened. 200 years of peace had ended with a single command. Speaker Iller spoke quietly. How long until the first weapon arrives? The tactical officer checked the incoming data. Several are already moving. The display zoomed in on one signal. A massive object had emerged from deep space. It was far larger than any normal warship. The structure was shaped like a moving fortress. Thick armor layers, heavy weapon rings, and engines that glowed with enormous power. The officer whispered the size measurement, 30 kilometers long. Several delegates gasped. That's not a ship, Morven muttered. No, Mara said quietly. It was never meant to be. The fortress continued accelerating toward the Echoform swarm. Its engines burned like small suns in the darkness. Sun Tao felt a strange mix of fear and curiosity. Humanity had hidden machines like this for centuries, machines the rest of the galaxy had never seen. Speaker Iller turned toward Mara again. What exactly did we just activate? Mara looked at the fortress signal. The Aegis Bastions. The name sounded ancient. Morven frowned. I have never heard of them. Very few people have, Mara replied. The display zoomed closer to the approaching fortress. The surface of the massive machine was covered in weapon ports and sensor towers. But it also had something else. Repair drones. Thousands of them. They were designed for long isolation, Mara explained. Fully automated. Self-repairing. Self-supplying. How many exist? Speaker Iller asked. Mara hesitated. 27. The chamber fell silent again. 27 automated war fortresses hidden across the galaxy. Waiting. Sleeping. Morven's voice sounded uneasy. And if these machines turn against us? Mara looked directly at him. They won't. You sound very certain. I am. Why? Mara answered with one simple sentence. Because they are not programmed to obey humans. That confused several delegates. Then who do they obey? Sun Tao asked. Mara pointed at the display. They obey the Ashfall protocol. The tactical officer interrupted. New update. Everyone turned back to the screen. The Echoform swarm had finished consuming the wreckage of the Bastion Actual. The creatures were reorganizing. More shapes were forming. Dozens of them. Now, they were clearly moving toward the council system. Their speed was increasing. They're adapting again, the officer said. How long until they reach the first colony? Speaker Iller asked. Less than 6 hours. Fear spread through the chamber again. 6 hours was nothing in interstellar defense time, but the Aegis Bastion Fortress was already closing the distance. The tactical officer zoomed the display. The giant machine was approaching the swarm rapidly. Morven leaned forward. One fortress cannot stop that many. No, Mara said, but it will slow them. The fortress changed direction slightly. Huge panels along its sides began opening. Inside those panels were hundreds of weapon systems, massive energy cannons, missile launch bays, defensive shields. The tactical officer read the system report. Power output rising. The fortress fired. A beam of pure white energy cut across space. The blast struck the front of the Echoform swarm. For a moment, the creatures disappeared in the light. Fragments scattered everywhere. Cheers started in parts of the council chamber. But the celebration ended quickly. The fragments were moving again, reforming. The Echoforms were adapting again. Morven shook his head. This is useless. But the fortress fired again, and again. Each blast destroyed several Echoforms. But the creatures continued coming. Then the fortress changed tactics. Thousands of small drones launched from its hull. The drone spread into space like a cloud. Each drone carried a small energy core. They surrounded the swarm. Then all the drones detonated at the same time. A massive explosion lit up the dark region. The blast wave scattered the Echoforms across thousands of kilometers. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the fragments began pulling together again. But this time something was different. They were slower, much slower. The explosion had damaged them. The tactical officer spoke with excitement. They are regenerating at half speed. The council chamber filled with hopeful whispers. Maybe the machines could stop them after all. But then the sensor grid detected something new. Deep inside the Echoform swarm, a massive shape was moving, much larger than the others. The tactical officer stared at the readings. That contact is growing. The display zoomed in. At first it looked like a cluster of fragments. Then the fragments combined. Piece by piece, they formed something enormous, a shape that looked disturbingly similar to the human fortress, but larger, much larger. Morven whispered in horror. It's copying the fortress. The Echoforms had watched the battle. They had learned. Now they were building their own version of the Aegis Bastion, made from living metal. The tactical officer's voice shook. Size estimate, 40 kilometers. Sun Tao felt cold fear spread through his body. The creatures were not just copying ships. They were copying weapons. Speaker Iller turned slowly toward Mara. Can your machines fight something like that? Mara did not answer immediately. She watched the growing Echoform structure carefully. Then she said quietly, That depends. On what? On how many fortresses arrive in time. As if answering her words, the sensor map updated again. More signals appeared. Another fortress. Then another. 3 more Aegis bastions were now approaching the battle. But the Echoform superstructure was growing faster. Huge tendrils of living metal stretched out from it, absorbing the smaller creatures. Building mass. Building power. The first fortress fired again. But the giant structure barely slowed. Instead, a long spear-like extension launched from the Echoform mass. It struck the fortress directly. Armor plates shattered. The massive machine spun in space. Gasps filled the council chamber. Even the ancient human weapon was struggling. Morven whispered in disbelief. If that thing reaches our systems, no fleet could stop it, Sun Tao finished quietly. The tactical officer suddenly spoke again. There is one more signal. Everyone looked at the display. Far beyond the approaching fortresses, a new beacon had activated, but this one was different. It was deeper in space, much farther away, and much larger. The officer read the system data slowly. I don't believe this. Speaker Iller turned toward him. What is it? The officer swallowed. It's not an Aegis bastion. Mara's eyes narrowed. Then what is it? The officer looked at the scale measurement. His voice dropped to a whisper. It's the Ashfall core. The room went silent again. Morven spoke carefully. What is the Ashfall core? Mara Van stared at the distant signal. For the first time since the crisis began, she looked truly afraid. It's the reason the war ended. The council members exchanged confused looks. What does it do? Speaker Iller asked. Mara did not take her eyes off the display. It doesn't fight enemies. Then what does it fight? She answered quietly. It fights entire star systems. The tactical officer zoomed the map again. The Ashfall core was moving, slowly, but directly toward the Echoform swarm, and its energy signature was growing stronger every second. Sun Tao felt the terrible truth forming in his mind. Humanity had not just hidden warships. They had hidden something far worse. A weapon designed not to win battles, but to end them completely, and it was now on its way. The council chamber had grown very quiet, not the calm quiet of peace, but the heavy silence that comes when everyone understands how serious the situation has become. On the main display, the battle far away in deep space continued. 3 human Aegis Bastion fortresses had now joined the fight. Their massive weapon systems fired again and again, sending bright beams across the darkness. Each blast destroyed parts of the Echoform swarm. Fragments exploded outward like shining dust. But the creatures kept rebuilding themselves. The Echoforms did not feel fear. They did not panic. They simply adapted. And now they had created something new. The enormous Echoform superstructure continued growing. It had already become larger than the first human fortress. Its shape was strange and uneven, like a living mountain of metal and moving parts. Huge tendrils stretched outward from its body. Some of those tendrils looked like weapons. Others looked like sensor towers. The creature was learning from the human machines. Sun Tao watched the battle with wide eyes. They are copying everything, he whispered. Morven from the Car Dominion clenched his claws. If they learn fast enough, they will become stronger than our entire fleet. The tactical officer nodded grimly. That is correct. Another fortress joined the battle, for Aegis bastions now surrounded the swarm. Their combined firepower lit up the darkness like a storm of stars. For a moment it looked like the Echoforms might finally be overwhelmed. But then the giant Echoform structure moved. It released a wave of smaller creatures. Hundreds of them. They spread out in every direction. Several rushed toward the nearest fortress. The machine fired its defensive weapons. Energy cannons blasted the attackers apart, but many still reached the hull. They attached themselves to the fortress surface. Then something terrible happened. The Echoforms began absorbing the metal armor. The fortress hull slowly melted where the creatures touched it. The tactical officer's voice rose with alarm. They are consuming the armor. The council members stared in disbelief. Even ancient human war machines were not safe. Speaker Iller turned toward Ambassador Mara Vance. You said these weapons could protect the galaxy. They can, Mara replied, but they cannot win alone. Morven frowned. What does that mean? Mara pointed to another signal, moving across the display. The signal that had appeared earlier, the Ashfall core. It was still far away, but its energy reading was enormous. The tactical officer looked nervous. Energy output increasing. Sun Tao studied the numbers. Even from that distance, the power reading was higher than any known ship reactor. Morven spoke slowly. You said this thing can destroy star systems. Mara nodded. That was its original purpose. The chamber filled with uneasy whispers. Speaker Iller looked troubled. If that weapon is used near our colonies, it would destroy them too, Mara finished. The room fell silent again. This was a terrible truth. The Ashfall core was not a careful weapon. It was a last resort. Sun Tao turned toward Mara. Then why activate it? Mara's answer was simple. Because if the Echoform spread across the galaxy, every star system will eventually be lost. The tactical officer suddenly interrupted. Alert! Everyone looked back at the battle. The Echoform superstructure had finished forming. It was enormous now, nearly 50 kilometers wide. Its surface moved like living metal. Huge weapon-like extensions began forming along its sides. Morven whispered in disbelief. It's building weapons. The creature had watched the fortresses fire their cannons. Now it was copying the technology. A bright beam suddenly fired from the Echoform structure. The blast struck one of the human fortresses. The enormous machine shook violently. Part of its armor exploded outward. Gasps filled the council chamber. They copied the weapons already, the officer said. The battle had changed. The Echoforms were no longer just surviving. They were fighting back. One of the Aegis bastions launched another wave of explosive drones. The drones detonated around the giant creature, but the damage was smaller this time. The Echoforms were adapting to the attacks. Morven slammed his fist on the table. This is hopeless. But Mara shook her head. No. Speaker Iller looked at her. You still believe we can win? Yes. How? Mara pointed to the distant signal again. The Ashfall core. The tactical officer zoomed the display. The massive object was now much closer. For the first time, its shape became visible. It was not a normal fortress. It looked more like a floating city. A giant circular structure surrounded a glowing central core. Large engine rings rotated slowly around it. Dozens of smaller defense ships flew beside it like guardians. Sun Tao whispered in awe. That thing is enormous. Yes, Mara said quietly, and it is still only half awake. Morven turned toward her sharply. Half awake? The core has been sleeping for 2 centuries, she explained. Its systems are still powering up. Speaker Iller frowned. How long? Until it reaches the battle. Approximately 20 minutes. The tactical officer suddenly spoke again. The Echoform structure is moving. Everyone looked back at the display. The giant creature had changed direction. It was no longer attacking the fortresses. Instead, it was accelerating toward the council system. It had learned something important. The fortresses were only obstacles. The real targets were the populated worlds behind them. Morven stood up in alarm. It's heading straight for our colonies. The officer confirmed. Estimated arrival at outer colonies 4 hours. The chamber erupted with worried voices. 4 hours was not enough time to evacuate even a single world. Speaker Iller raised the staff again. Silence. The noise slowly faded. He turned toward Mara. If the Ashfall core arrives too late. Mara looked at the display again. The Echoform structure was accelerating faster. Its living metal surface continued expanding. New weapon shapes formed every few seconds. Then Mara spoke quietly. Then humanity will activate the final protocol. Morven frowned. What protocol? Mara answered slowly. The core does not only destroy enemies. What else does it do? It can collapse a star. The chamber fell completely silent. Sun Tao felt his heart stop for a moment. Collapse a star. That meant turning an entire solar system into a deadly explosion. Morven stared at her. You would destroy a star system to stop them? Yes. And the people living there? Mara did not look away from the screen. If the Echoforms reach those worlds, they will not die quickly. Her voice was cold now. They will be copied. No one spoke. The truth was too terrible to argue with. The tactical officer suddenly pointed at the display. The Ashfall core is accelerating. The giant machine's engines ignited. Massive energy rings spun faster around its center. Its speed increased dramatically. Sun Tao watched the numbers climb. It would reach the battle in less than 10 minutes now. But the Echoform superstructure was still moving toward the colonies. It had grown even larger. Now it was more than 60 kilometers across. And it continued expanding. Morven whispered in horror. If that thing reaches a populated system, no fleet could stop it, Sun Tao said quietly. Speaker Iller turned toward Mara again. Will the core arrive in time? Mara did not answer immediately. She stared at the approaching signals. The Echoform monster, the damaged human fortresses, and the massive Ashfall core racing toward them. Finally she spoke. It will arrive. But... Mara took a slow breath. But the battle will destroy everything in that region of space. Sun Tao looked at the map. Several small colonies were located near the battlefield. Mining stations, trade outposts, civilian ships. All of them were still there. The council chamber grew silent again, because everyone knew what was coming. A weapon powerful enough to destroy the Echoforms would also destroy everything nearby, and the Ashfall core was only minutes away. The council chamber felt frozen in time. No one spoke. No one moved. Every eye was fixed on the enormous display showing the battle in deep space. The Echoform superstructure continued moving toward the outer colonies. Its massive shape stretched across the sensor grid like a living storm. It was now more than 70 kilometers wide. The creature had grown larger by absorbing hundreds of smaller echoforms into its body. Long tendrils of metal-like material stretched out from it, twisting and reshaping themselves constantly. It no longer looked like a swarm. It looked like a living fortress. Behind it, the damaged human Aegis Bastion fortresses continued firing their weapons, trying to slow it down. But the Echoforms had adapted. Each new attack worked less than the last. The creatures had learned the patterns. They were evolving, and they were getting closer to the colonies every minute. Inside the council chamber, Speaker Iller stood motionless. "How long until the Ashfall Corps arrives?" he asked. The tactical officer checked the display. 5 minutes. The room filled with quiet whispers. 5 minutes. That was the time left before the most powerful human weapon ever built reached the battlefield. Sun Tao watched the numbers carefully. Even from the distant camera feeds, the Ashfall Core looked terrifying. The enormous circular structure glowed brighter with every second as its internal reactors continued to wake. Energy flowed to the giant rings surrounding its central core. The power reading kept climbing. Morven from the Car Dominion crossed his arms tightly. That weapon will destroy everything near it. "Yes," Ambassador Maravan said quietly. "Even the human fortresses?" "Yes." The council members exchanged uneasy looks. The Ashfall Core was not designed to protect ships. It was designed to erase threats. The tactical officer suddenly pointed at the display. "The Echoform structure is changing again." The image zoomed in. The giant creature was spreading wide panels of moving metal across its surface. Those panels began forming weapon shapes similar to the ones on the human fortresses. The Echoforms had finished learning. Morven whispered in disbelief. "It's copying the core's energy pattern." That was the most dangerous thing that could happen. If the Echoforms copied the Ashfall Core's power system, they could create their own version of the weapon. Speaker Iller spoke sharply. "Then the core must destroy it immediately." Mara shook her head. "It cannot fire yet." "Why not?" "The weapon requires full energy alignment." "How long?" 3 minutes after arrival. The council members looked back at the display in horror. 3 minutes was a long time in battle. Too long. The Echoform creature continued accelerating toward the colonies. Behind it, the damaged Aegis Bastions fired again and again, but their weapons barely slowed the monster now. The tactical officer gave another update. "Outer colony evacuation attempts have begun, but it is too late," Sun Tao said quietly. "Even the fastest civilian ships could not leave the system in time. The Echoform creature would reach them first." Morven looked toward Mara. "You said humanity built these weapons to protect the galaxy." "Yes." "Then protect those colonies." Mara watched the approaching Ashfall Core. Her face looked calm again. Humanity already planned for this possibility. Speaker Iller frowned. "What do you mean?" Mara did not answer immediately. Instead, she pointed at the display. The Ashfall Core had arrived. The massive structure moved into battle zone like a rising star. Even the Echoform superstructure seemed to pause for a moment. The size difference was incredible. The core was larger than anything else in the region, nearly 100 kilometers wide. Its central energy sphere glowed bright white. The 4 damaged Aegis Bastions moved into defensive positions around it. But the Echoform creature did not retreat. Instead, it turned toward the core, and then it attacked. Huge tendrils shot outward from its body like spears. The Ashfall Core's defensive shields activated instantly. Brilliant energy walls surrounded the giant machine. The tendrils struck the shields and exploded into fragments. But the Echoforms kept coming. Hundreds of smaller creatures rushed toward the core. The fortresses fired their weapons again, destroying many of them, but some still reached the shields. They attached themselves to the glowing barrier. "Try and consume it." The tactical officer spoke urgently. "Core weapon charging." A new number appeared on the display. Energy alignment, 10%. The chamber fell silent again. Morven stared at the screen. "At this rate, the colonies will be destroyed before the weapon fires." Mara nodded slowly. "Yes." Speaker Iller looked at her. You said humanity planned for this. Yes. Then explain. Mara turned toward the main display. Watch carefully. The Ashfall core suddenly changed position. Instead of staying between the Echoforms and the colonies, it moved closer to the monster. Much closer. Sun Tao leaned forward in surprise. What is it doing? Morven's eyes widened. It's moving into the swarm. The core continued advancing. The Echoforms attacked it from every direction, but the shields held. The tactical officer shouted, energy alignment rising. 20%, 30%. The creature reacted. It began copying the shield pattern. Metal plates across its body shifted shape. Energy fields appeared along its surface. It was adapting again, but the core moved even closer. Now it was only a few kilometers away from the giant Echoform structure. The chamber lights flickered as the energy readings increased. 50%. The Echoform monster released a massive beam of energy. The blast struck the core directly. The shields trembled, but they did not break. Morven whispered, why is it getting closer? Sun Tao suddenly understood. The weapon has a range limit. Mara nodded slowly. Yes. The Ashfall core was designed to destroy enemies within a specific radius, but it required the target to be close. Very close. Speaker Iller spoke quietly. You are drawing the Echoforms toward the weapon. Yes. But the colonies will survive? Mara finished. The core moved even closer. Now the two enormous structures were almost touching. The Echoform monster attacked with everything it had. Tendrils struck the shields. Energy beams flashed. Fragments of metal flew across space. The tactical officer shouted, energy alignment, 90%. The entire council chamber held its breath. The Echoform sensed the danger. The giant creature began pulling away, trying to escape, but it was too late. The Ashfall core's central sphere suddenly became brighter than a star. Energy alignment, 100%. Mara Vance spoke one quiet command. Execute Ashfall. The weapon fired. A silent wave of pure energy exploded outward from the core. It was not a beam. It was a sphere of light. The wave expanded rapidly, swallowing the Echoform monster. The creature tried to escape, but the energy reached it instantly. For a moment, the massive structure froze. Then it began breaking apart. Every fragment disintegrated into dust. The smaller Echoforms around it vanished as well. The energy wave continued expanding, but the core had positioned itself carefully. The wave stopped just before reaching the nearest colonies. Everything inside the battle zone disappeared. The Echoforms were gone. The chamber remained silent for several seconds. Then the tactical officer spoke softly. Echoform signals gone. No one in the room moved. After 2 centuries of hiding, humanity's final weapon had saved the galaxy. Speaker Iller slowly lowered his staff. It is over. Morven looked at the display. The Ashfall core now floated quietly in space. Its energy levels slowly dropped. The damaged Aegis bastions moved around it like silent guardians. Sun Tao leaned back in his chair. The galaxy had survived, but the truth was now impossible to hide. Humanity had protected the galaxy for centuries, not with diplomacy, not with treaties, but with terrible weapons waiting in the dark. Speaker Iller turned toward Mara Vance. The ban on human weapons must now be reconsidered. Mara looked at the distant core. Then she shook her head gently. No. The council members looked confused. Why? Morven asked. Because the lesson of today is not that humanity needs weapons, she said. It is that some weapons must only exist at the moment the galaxy has no other choice. Outside the station windows, the stars shone quietly again. The Echoforms were gone. The colonies were safe. And somewhere in deep space, the ancient Ashfall core began slowly returning to sleep, waiting for a future the galaxy hoped would never come. The end.